Bring in Hugh Hewitt, MSNBC political analyst, host of the Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network, and former Vermont Governor Howard Dean, also an MSNBC contributor, also a former chair of the Democratic National Committee. So, Hugh Hewitt, let me start with you, and let's pick up on what Katie Tur was just talking about there. Suppose Donald Trump looks around when he gets sworn in as president and says, you know what, I'm not going to do the blind trust. I'm going to, I don't think these laws technically say I have to do it, so I'm not going to do it. Can he still govern the country effectively?
Sure he could. I don't think he's going to do that, Steve. I'm one of those Washington ethics lawyers that Katie was referring to. I was a White House counsel, assistant counsel, used to put together these things for appointees who had to divest themselves. I remember Hank Paulson, I wasn't in the White House at that time, he had to sell $470 million worth of stock when he entered the government. Most of those laws apply to sub-cabinet, cabinet members. They don't apply to the president. It's good form for the president to voluntarily comply with the Office of Government Ethics admonition against the appearance of impropriety. But I think what's going to happen is a guy named Don McCann is going to become, he's a Jones Day partner, he's going to become the counsel to the president. He'll hire a bunch of smart lawyers, usually 7 to 10 lawyers in that office, and they'll figure it out by January. But he's right. If you look back at the Clinton Foundation, you draw up a MOA, and you hopefully abide by it to avoid the appearance of impropriety. It doesn't always work, didn't work with Bill Clinton. But I do want to mention, Steve, in that New York Times sit-down, the president-elect also defended Stephen Bannon very, very vigorously. I think Howard Dean called Steve Bannon a Nazi. It was really quite, I think the news out of that meeting is that defense of Steve Bannon, actually, and the condemnation of the white supremacist alt-right.
We actually have, I think we can put this up on the screen. This was what you're mentioning there, Hugh Hewitt, Donald Trump in this meeting with the New York Times talking about Steve Bannon, who he's announced will be one of his top advisors in the White House. He was asked about all these accusations of Steve Bannon and the alt-right. He said, if I thought he was racist or alt-right or any of those things, the term we could use, I wouldn't even think about hiring him. Again, that was Donald Trump. This is from Maggie Haberman, a reporter for the New York Times. She said that was Donald Trump's response when he was asked about Steve Bannon. Well, Howard Dean, Hugh Hewitt used your name, so I'll ask you, what do you make of what the president-elect had to say about Stephen Bannon?
Well, I think it was like a lot of the things he said in the campaign. There was no foundation reality. Steve Bannon says that he's the head of the alt-right, or he did before he went to work for Donald Trump. The website is clearly anti-Semitic, misogynist, anti-black, white nationalist, and the people who called themselves the alt-right went around sticking out, making a Nazi salute in Washington on Sunday, yelling Heil Victory. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. In this case, there's just fire. So I think Trump can say whatever he wants, but it doesn't make it true.
Let's talk, too, about this report again. This just in the last hour from the Wall Street Journal. They are reporting, according to their sources, that Mitt Romney has emerged as the frontrunner to be Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of State. They are also reporting Nikki Haley has become the leading candidate to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Howard Dean, if this is sort of the face of foreign policy and national security that emerges, if Mattis is the pick for defense secretary, it's been reported he's the frontrunner for that. If you've got Romney at state, if you've got Nikki Haley as the ambassador to the UN, that would certainly defy some of the predictions we were seeing for the last 2 weeks, some of the names that were associated for that. A lot of these were Trump critics, some of them very vociferous Trump critics. Would that make you less concerned, more confident in the direction this administration's taking?
A little bit, because these are mainstream Republicans. The thing is that Trump is going to make his own policy. And I think anybody who is hired as a policymaker around him has to have his ear, and he has to be somebody he's going to listen to. And that we don't have the answer to. But I'd certainly much rather have Mitt Romney and Nikki Haley in those positions than some of the other names that were mentioned. Let me talk for half a second about this conflict of interest stuff. I don't think too many people in the electorate care about this right this moment. I do think it's preventing him from getting beyond the ceiling of the 44% approval rating that he has now, which I think is the lowest for an inaugurated president since they've been taking polls. But later on, when other things happen that aren't good, which always happens in every presidency, that's when it's going to hurt him. But right now, I think he should be forthcoming and limit his business dealings and so forth and so on. But I have to say that I don't think it's going to hurt him much until, for other reasons, he becomes unpopular, and then it's going to sink him.
And Hugh Hewitt, just quickly on Mitt Romney as Secretary of State, do you think just watching Donald Trump in action during this campaign, I know he churned through a number of campaign managers, you obviously have that personal friction there between Romney and Trump during the campaign at least, would that be a durable relationship, do you think?
Yeah, successful developers are often used to working with the people that last week they were throwing hammers at. This is a defining characteristic of the president-elect. And I'm very amused. He's head-faked most of the left and a lot of the media into the stands, and he keeps doing it like Kyrie Irving. I will tell you, if Mitt Romney comes in as Secretary of State and General Mattis as the Secretary of Defense, the doors are going to open and everyone is going to say, I want to be a part of a change administration. And even people like Jack Keane, who said, nah, I don't really want to do it, or maybe Stanley McChrystal for the Department of Homeland Security, or any number of people will come in. The one thing I can't believe didn't get asked today, Steve, at the New York Times is, who's going to be your Supreme Court nominee? This is the biggest deal. I'm a big fan of Justice Willett down in Texas, who's 50, but there are all sorts of people, from Mike Lee at 46 to Dianne Sykes at 58. 100 judges in 100 days are coming, Steve, and this president-elect is a penchant for surprise and lightning-like moves. And I'll criticize him when it's time to do so, but thus far, for the first 2.5 weeks, it's been a remarkable display of dexterity in confusing his opponents.
Most fascinating name I've heard floated so far for Supreme Court, by the way, Ted Cruz, just thinking of the political and legal dynamics there. Anyway, Hugh Hewitt, Howard Dean, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate that.
Go Bucks.
Thank you.
It's a big game this weekend. You know what? I'm with Ohio State, too. Oh, boy, I just lost